Welcome back to Observation Point Live. I am your host, Chuck Hobbs. It seems like we just went off air after the 5-hour marathon that we had on election night, as we all waited to see who would win the presidential race, as well as many of the key down ticket races that we have been watching here for the last few months. 2 days later, we still don't have a president yet, but it's inching closer by the minute. So tonight, what I want to do is bring in some of my friends, individuals who have had a part in what we have seen over the last few weeks. I have Jimmy Greene, who is a Republican. He likes to call himself an independent now, but truth be told, those old habits die hard. But he's a good Republican in that he was one of the founding members of the Lincoln Republicans, the individuals who have been providing so many of the documentaries, the ads that have been cutting into the Trump administration's record over the last 4 years. I welcome Jimmy Greene coming out of Michigan this evening. How are you doing, Noop?
I'm really good, Noop. I appreciate the audience, and it's been a long 48 hours, and I imagine we got a little more time, so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about where we're going from here and where we've come from.
We're glad to have you here. I also have Pat Grayson. Many of you who watched with us the other night, Pat was able to give us quite a bit of insight in regards to the political process. He's a numbers cruncher, political strategist. Glad to have you back this evening, Pat.
Chuck, glad to be here. Glad to be here with these guests, and looking forward to talking about some numbers in this presidency.
Absolutely. Also have coming out of South Florida, my friend, my homegirl, Nik Harris, a rising politico here in the state of Florida, attorney, also works very closely with our agricultural commissioner, the only Democrat in the Florida cabinet, Nikki Fried. Nik Harris, welcome back to the show. It's been a little while.
It has. Thank you, my brother. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Now, like most of us across America, we have been on pins and needles for the last 48 hours, watching the results come in. Every 12 hours or so, I put up a post on Facebook. Y'all good? Everybody okay? That's where I am, because I want to make sure that folks aren't about to stroke out or anything like that based upon the election results. But we all know that it is tense. We also recognize that the Biden administration is actually inching closer and closer to being a reality. Last check, depending on the source, Biden is at about 253 electoral college votes or 264. CNN is calling it 253. The Associated Press still has him at 264. The difference being Arizona and whether or not Arizona will be officially called for Biden. Also, we all are laughing at the memes across social media about the sloths being on the state flags or being the official bean counters out in Nevada. We've got reports that it might be several days before Nevada finishes, but the way it stands right now, at last check, Biden leads by about 12,000 votes in the state of Nevada. And then Georgia. If anybody had told me 3 months ago that Georgia potentially would be in play for Joe Biden, I would not have believed it, just because I have lived the majority of my life in the South. And during that time in the South, I have witnessed how the South has become solidly Republican. But as it stands right now, I believe that fewer than 9,000 votes separate Biden and Trump. Trump still slightly in the lead, but there are about 30,000 ballots still left to be counted, many of which are from population areas that are heavily Democratic. So we will continue to watch that. So with that, Jimmy, I want to start off with you right quick. Pennsylvania is also still tight. And I have noticed that President Trump and many of his surrogates have called for the votes to stop being counted. What are your thoughts with regards to that strategy? Is it a good strategy or not for the president?
It's a terrible strategy. I have to, first say that, this has been a problem with Republicans from time after time after time. And this is a point where the rooster truly has come home to roost. Years ago, I warned that Republicans, if they didn't expand their demographics, would have these kind of fights, or even voter suppression, those kind of things. And as opposed to messaging and drawing people in to vote, the idea that they want to stop the count right now is ridiculous. Because again, you can suffocate a message, but at the end of the day, nothing is more powerful than that vote that is coming in. If you stop it today, as opposed to that 3-day deadline that the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania gave them, all you're doing is basically, it's not even sour grapes. It's essentially stealing the election, which is ironic considering that's what they're saying, that somebody's stealing the election. There's an absurdity in this. And let me just say this too. there might be voter irregularity somewhere, somehow. I always say this too, and this is not in defense of the Trump administration, but in defense of anybody who's running for elected office. If you can take the time off on a football field to contest a bad call, so a game isn't lost or won on that call, you can certainly, if there are improprieties, do the same thing with an election. But then there's an absurdity too. There is a relative opportunity to do that if in fact there is merit to it. I have not seen that merit yet. Sure, here or there, but when you look at the divide between what Biden got in votes and what Trump is suggesting might be fraudulent, there's still no contest to it. At the end of the day, whether it's Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I think there's a lawsuit in Wisconsin as well, it's death by 1,000 cuts, and it's not going to change what I believe is inevitable.
Jimmy, while I still have you on this first round of questioning, what is your opinion with regards to the impact that your group, the Lincoln Project, has had? I know quite a few of my viewers and followers on social media had a chance to see the 60 Minutes piece a few weeks ago. But again, you had been warning me, as well as our frat brother Tom Cunningham and others, about what it is that was about to go down for a long time, long before the Lincoln Project actually sprung into action this year. Can you talk to me a little bit about what your thoughts are as an individual and a group with regards to what impact your advocacy, your being the group plural, has had on this election season?
Well, I will tell you this: there isn't a single, and I think, I believe that'll be borne out too with some of your guests. There isn't anybody who voted for Hillary Clinton who ultimately in 16 who voted for Trump in 20. However, 15% of the people who voted for Trump in 16 voted for Biden in 20. 15%. Now, when you start talking about some of these close races, look at that number, 15%. Put that in Michigan, put that in Wisconsin, put that in Pennsylvania, put that in Florida. You have a different race. There's no question about it. 4 years ago, the Lincoln Project, and these are proud Republicans, so let me defend these folks. I know them personally. They're friends of mine. I think they went a step too far because they wanted to take the Senate out. Now it's like, that's a little too far for me. I like divided government. But the Lincoln Project 4 years ago, these were never Trumpers who ultimately became, when you talk about patriotism, they really were. I think about all the Republicans I've supported in the past, from Reagan to Romney to McCain to you name it. And I always laughed at Democrats, because now those folks are Republican heroes. Everybody loves John McCain now. Everybody loves Mitt Romney now. And I always said that Donald Trump was the Republican that everybody else used to accuse the other Republicans of being. So when they kept calling Bush a racist or Reagan a racist, I'm like, dude, they ain't the racist. Now you be careful what you ask for, you may get it. So the Lincoln Project just took a calculated effort. And this is a place where these folks have no place to go now. You can imagine they're ostracized by the Republican Party. Democrats will look at them with a sketchy eye. Nobody wants that wolf in their hen house either. So when you talk about real patriotism, you really are talking about the Lincoln Project. Whether you agree with them or not, these are people who blew up their value inside of a party and sacrificed their worth for this country. So, whether you like them, disagree with them, whatever, they demonstrated what very few people can, and that's putting your mouth where your country is.
With that, Jimmy, Pat, and Nik, we also are going to welcome to the screen the Honorable Mayor Steve Reed, Mayor of Montgomery, Alabama. Good evening, Brother Reed. Brother Reed, can you hear me?
Might be on mute.
All right. While we get his soundbite together, Nik, let me switch to you right quick while we get the mayor squared away here. Nik, down in South Florida, there's been some concerns that turnout by the Democratic Party might not have been up to par. What is it that you are hearing and or seeing down in that area in regards to what happened in 2020? We were very hopeful that Florida would be a closer race like we are seeing up in Georgia, and I was a little disappointed to see that we did not quite get that close this time. What are you seeing and hearing?
Well. First, let's clarify. I think Broward County, where I am, we did exactly what we were supposed to do. Broward County showed up and we showed out. I mean, at some point, let's be clear. Folks are calling for the head of our party in Florida to step down. That's what I'm hearing. We definitely blew the ground game in Miami. I was hearing it before. You know, we've got to stop, number one, treating our Latino and Latinx folks like they're a monolith. I was hearing that Biden was in late. We had stopped the ground game till probably a month before. Trump was still knocking on the door, and we've got to talk about this socialist argument. That plays with Cubans in South Florida, in Miami. And it was a message that Biden and his team could not overcome. And I'll say this. Sometimes we've got to have discussions about what flies in the face of logic. People thought it was a great idea to send Barack Obama here to Miami in the last few days. I was hearing the exact opposite. These folks who voted originally in that first term for Barack Obama remembered in that second term that he was having opening communication with Cuba. They were pissed. I mean, so we're talking about the wrong message that was sent. We know we lost Donna Shalala in South Florida. I was looking at these commercials saying I'm a pragmatic socialist. Again, I think these are the wrong messages we are sending to our Latino community. And it's something that we've got to address, or we're going to continue to bleed in South Florida. But I want to be clear. Broward County did what we were supposed to do. And I think if Miami had done that, we maybe have a different outcome. And that's unfortunate.
Very good. Also, on the stage, I guess that sounds like I'm down at Club Rolex talking about welcoming to the stage my ace, Corey Smith. How you doing? How you doing, brother?
Hey, what's up, everybody? How y'all doing, man? What's up?
Good. I'll be coming your way in a minute, but I want to talk to Pat for a few seconds. Pat, are you shocked that Georgia is this close to potentially flipping blue? I know that you follow politics closely as a strategist. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not surprised. One thing that I want to stick with tonight is the optics versus the metrics, meaning what it looks like versus what the numbers say. Stacey Abrams has put so much oomph into this thing to turn out the vote, to keep people motivated, to make sure there's no voter oppression going on or voter suppression. The state of Georgia, the Democrats there, Nikema Williams, everybody on board has made a point to turn out not just the Atlanta metro area, but the entire state, Democrats across the state. Now, we keep saying that chickens have come home to roost, but my question is, are they roosting right outside the pen? Are they roosting in the pen? Because what we've seen in Georgia is a specific example of this, is that the entire state is split, and it's split up to, last I saw, was about 0.2 percentage points. So people are engaged in Georgia. People are looking. People are paying attention, both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. And to me, that's more reflective of them being a newly minted battleground state, but also being in the game and turning out the vote.
Absolutely. Corey, I want to come to you and ask you this. Corey, can you hear me? Okay, Corey's off right now. Steve,
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, hold on. Corey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Sorry.
Boy, you Morehouse dudes, get it right. Let me ask you this. As a lawyer who has practiced in civil as well as criminal courts for the better part of over 2 decades now, are you surprised to see that the Trump administration has already trying to question the legitimacy of the vote count and in some instances suing to stop the count, not recount like in Bush v. Gore back in 2000, where there was a push by the Bush campaign at that point to stop the recounts in South Florida, but to stop the actual counts? Is that shocking you as a lawyer?
No, not at all. I mean, the short answer to that is no. You know, Donald Trump has shown that he's willing to do any and everything necessary for him to remain in office. And we all have our own theories as to why that is. You know, a lot of that centers around the fact that it's very possible that the Southern District of New York may be waiting for him with some cuffs. But, you know, the idea that he's doing this out of a legitimate concern for the validity or the integrity of the election is asinine. You know, he's not doing this for any other reason but to basically try any and everything he can to win this election, be it legitimately or illegitimately. And he's told us that since day one, that this thing would start. He's been telegraphing these moves that he's making. So, no, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Very good. Steve Reed, I think we've got you squared away now. Steve, can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Welcome, brother. I know that the other night we were trying to get you on, but I know that you were busy as all get out on election night, having to give your opinion on not only the national races, but all of the races across the state of Alabama. I want to start with your home state. Tommy Tuberville actually has beaten Doug Jones. I know that a couple of years ago, you and so many of our friends from Spelman and Morehouse and Clark and Morris Brown up in Alabama were working hard to elect Doug Jones for the seat that was vacated when Jeff Sessions was named Attorney General. And now, barely 2 years later, Tommy Tuberville, former football coach, and there's no aspersions cast at football coaches. Another person who's coming on later on this evening is one of the smartest men I know, Cedric Jones, who happens to be a high school football coach in addition to all of his Renaissance man stuff. But I want to ask you, Steve, Tommy Tuberville is not necessarily the brightest light. And I know that you being an Alabama Crimson Tide fan also, it doesn't cost you anything to actually talk about the fact that this isn't the brightest man that you all are sending to the United States Senate. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about your thoughts on Tommy Tuberville beating Doug Jones?
Well, I think, well, first of all, let me thank you, Chuck, for having me on. And I'm sorry I couldn't join you on election eve, on election night, with so many things going on across the country. It's obviously it's still unfolding. I'm thinking about my colleagues as a former chief election official for Montgomery County. Thinking about those folks who are tabulating those ballots. I've been in those rooms before. I know what it's like to tabulate those absentee ballots, those provisional ballots, those mail-in ballots. And so, you know, it's a lot of hard work by a lot of good people that usually goes unseen and unheard when we're thinking about our election system. So first, I want to just thank them for the good work that they do from all the states, but certainly those that are still undecided this time. I think when we think about Coach Tuberville, we have to think about Alabama as a deeply red state. It is a southern state that has not seen the influx of people from other parts of the country that kind of tilted in various directions. So it hasn't gotten the level of new voters like a Virginia, North Carolina, certainly a Florida or Georgia. We're more in line with Tennessee. We're more in line with Mississippi. We're more in line with those states in the South, Arkansas, Louisiana, certainly, that are more native born and continue to be native voting states. And with that, there's a large conservatism that existed, whether it be a yellow dog Democrat, as they were called at one time, or whether it's now just a conservative Republican. And I think what you saw with Tommy Tuberville's win was that whoever had the R by their name was going to win this race. So the real fight was in the primary because this state has not gone for a Democrat in well over 40 plus years. And so that's kind of the uphill battle Doug Jones knew he would be fighting. That's what we all knew we'd be fighting as Democrats. There was some sliver of hope in that, given his record, being in there the last 2 years, that there may be an opportunity. But I think what we saw here, as we saw in some other states across this country, is that Trump's tailwinds are very strong. And he has long coattails, and the Republican Party has not only won that at levels at the federal level to keep us from regaining the U.S. Senate, but more importantly, and you all may have touched on this already, is that we didn't gain any state legislatures. That is something that I think every political observer needs to be aware of. When we had more than 2/3 of legislative seats open after the 2010 backlash that happened after President Obama's 2008 election, where we lost 1,000 state legislative seats. They've then gone to gerrymandered districts, and they've gone to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. That was something that I was really looking to see whether or not our ticket had coattails, not just in certain blue states, but in other red states where we could maybe get back state legislatures and governorships. And I didn't see that happen at the way that I wanted to. And so I think Tuberville is an indicator of Trump's fierce loyalty that he engenders by a lot of people, which I think tells us a lot about this country and where the tenor is for a lot of first-time white voters, as well as a lot of repeat Republican voters too, is that Trump is not an aberration. And so whether it's a Tommy Tuberville here or it's a state senator in Ohio, these things have a lot of impact far beyond just the presidential race. And I think that's something for all of us to be aware of.
Absolutely. Pat Grayson, I want to throw that back to you. I know that you wanted to comment on what Mayor Reed just said. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, I want to go back to the optics versus the metrics. Now, optics are that in 2017, when we first elected or got Doug Jones elected, we had all of these independent expenditures coming in, spending all these millions of dollars to get him elected. He did by a very small percentage, but he did get elected. The metrics of 2020 right now, we knew Tuberville was going to be on the ticket. We knew Trump was going to be on the ticket. The objective and the purpose of a strategist is to say, okay, we're going to have higher than expected numbers. We're going to have people voting straight ticket. Our objective is to identify and hold the base, but to also go in there and find that low hanging fruit. So there's an anomaly with the strategy when you don't realize that we've got to go out here and find 50,000 extra voters that either that don't vote on a regular basis, that need a little bit more motivation, or they just haven't participated in the process. And by any means necessary, you have to turn those voters out. So I think the forward-looking strategy or forecasting, how do we get to a win? What is the path to winning? Knowing that it's a presidential year, knowing that Alabama votes red, how do we get there? And we could not depend on the IEs to come in this time because there were other battleground and critical states and critical battles that were going on. But we, as an Alabama organization, as the Democratic Party, as the strategists here, should have sat down and tried to figure out what is the path forward. And it's not in media buys. It's not in buying all the YouTube, buying all the Facebook, buying all the commercials. It's in grassroots investments within African-American people of color, trying to figure out what do we need to do to have relational organizing, to organize community by community. It's a behemoth of a task, but it has to be done when you have a scenario such as what we just experienced, Joe.
Absolutely. And with that takes us to the second topic that I want to address with each of you this evening, which is the bitter divide. Mayor Reed talked about it. Brother Grayson talked about it, and Brother Greene has as well. The concern being that polarization has really gotten to another level in this country. Not saying it's the worst ever. I mean, obviously, we can go back to the election of 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected. I think things got a lot worse a few months later when the Civil War began. But things are not really good right now. And with that in mind, there are a number of Democrats who are cautiously optimistic. But if for some reason Donald Trump stages some type of comeback some way, somehow, and actually gets this 270 before Joe Biden, I think there's going to be a lot of disappointed Democrats. Likewise, I was poking the bear a little bit on social media earlier today in regards to how many of my conservative friends are eerily quiet right now with the fact that Joe Biden is between 253, if you believe CNN, or 264 electoral college votes, if you believe the Associated Press. A number of my Republican friends are not very happy right now that Donald Trump looks as if he will be a one-term president. But the key issue here is the divide. And is there an opportunity in America to bridge that divide? If so, how? So I want to go first to Jimmy Greene with regards to that. Jimmy, specifically, I want to ask you this. What is it about Donald Trump that makes him so attractive to so many of our fellow Americans, including between 12 to 20% of Black men, if you believe some of the exit polls? Can you speak on that for a little bit?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. You know, I work in construction, and I think in many respects, I kind of touched on it already, Chuck. You know, it's funny, you know, Republicans, and this goes back to the Tea Party. And you and I had conversations about this years ago, and I kept saying, you know, not everybody's racist. And the moment you keep calling everybody racist because they were Republican, you push them in a closet. And so many of those Republicans who weren't, but had Republican or conservative views, this isn't the first time. Donald Trump was interesting to me because, you know, he was the guy that had everybody pull their hoods out of the closet, which for me was easy because I prefer to identify who's a racist as opposed to assumptive views. But, you know, for me, he wasn't attractive to Republicans more so than he was revealing. He pushed a lot of those people back out of the closet, and he was kind of a FU to Democrats in many respects. A lot of these Republicans they were tired of being pigeonholed. You know, Hillary didn't help matters at all with the deplorables, you know, things like that. So now that's not to vacate that the party has made being a racist very, very comfortable, mind you, and that's always been an issue for them, and a reason they've never been able to really expand their base. But when you start talking about this divide, let me make it political. When Obama came in, one of the things when you talk about real political wonks like me, the reason most of us are quiet is because the deed has been done. Trump allows Republicans to get back to a Republican base, and Mr. Reed said it so well. I would be very careful if I'm a Democrat celebrating. You got the presidency, mind you, but I'm telling you, with a candidate like Donald Trump, think about this, with a candidate like Donald Trump for 4 years, nobody had to speculate what kind of guy he was. You knew he would. This is the most transparent president we've ever had. He is what he is. He's the same guy who campaigned, didn't change one bit. And with all of that record turnout, you didn't win anything. You didn't increase your gap. The Senate is still here. Chances are it's still going to wind up being McConnell's. You didn't flip a single state house. All that considered, I wouldn't be too happy if I'm a Democrat patting myself on the back. If I'm a Democrat, I'm going, what in the hell happened? Because in many respects, this was a repudiation of and I talked about this earlier, when you consider how many Republicans went over and voted against Trump, it was a repudiation of Trump, not the party, because that does not bear out in the numbers at all. And you can't point to anything that would suggest that. My prediction is Joe Biden, who says I'm coming in to bridge the gap. There is no blue America or red America. In 2 years, Republicans will gain the House back, because one of the things that Republicans can always count on is that Democrats will ultimately be Democrats. And they will, in fact, overextend that power. They always do. And so bridging the gap, he's got a progressive base that's going to push him to do so. And I think the divide gets wider, sad to say. I think it gets wider, but I don't think it's more racial than it is more class and more political.
Nik Harris, taking up where Jimmy Greene just left, I want to ask you, what is it that the Democratic Party and or those of us who advocate for issues, be it Black issues, Latinx issues, LGBTQ community issues, religious freedom issues, what is it that we can do to bridge the gap with many Americans who, like Jimmy Greene just described, don't believe themselves to be racist, homophobes, or religious bigots, but vote for a president that has either touched upon it or has outright fanned the flames of that over the last 4 years? What is it that we can do to actually bridge that gap with those fellow Americans who don't seem to hear what it is we seem to be saying about the nature of discrimination here in these United States, even in 2020?
We're all struggling with that question right now. What I can tell you is most folks are tired of being told what they should think, and we've got to really sit down and listen to folks. I've gotten into it with some friends who I've said, I don't think that we're talking about almost 70 million people that refuse to repudiate a president that is racist, xenophobic, homophobic, misogynistic, you name it. And I'm deeply concerned that 70 million people in this country were comfortable with that. What does that say? And I think as a party, we've got to go back. Number one, it bothered me deeply. I look at my own state in Florida that we could lose. This wasn't even close in Florida. And I was watching my page today and people were going, we're too far to the left. And I actually think that's a mistake. I think our party is not really listening to that liberal, that progressive side of this party. I look at the fact that on the amendment, we had an amendment to pass a $15 minimum wage that passed overwhelmingly. What does that say? That Democrats lost up and down the ticket overwhelmingly, but something like that passed because we are not embracing that. We're not talking about, the Green New Deal. We're not talking about people in their pockets are disappearing middle class. I don't know that everybody, I don't know what that number is to say that most people did this because they support racism. I think sometimes we can be too woke. I hate to say that, because as I worked a precinct for 14 hours on Tuesday, you know how many brothers, I was in a Black neighborhood, how many brothers walked by me and I was like, are you gonna vote? And I was told repeatedly, why am I making a choice between two racist white men? who don't care about my community. And I had to talk about, it's not just about this presidential race, it's about down ballot. You know, I'm right here in Broward County. We just elected the first Black ever state attorney, first Black sheriff, first Black public defender, first Black male supervisor of elections. And nobody was even having that conversation. So we've got to do something to bridge these divides. And I will disagree with Jimmy just a little bit. I think we'll make room for those folks. If they're willing to come over, I know that was said earlier about the Lincoln Republicans. We've got to start listening or we're going to continue to lose, because the message that we're currently selling, it isn't working. But I just want to say this, shout out one more time to Stacey Abrams and Black women that continue to carry democracy in this party, because this is the difference. And I want to also say, I think Reverend Bland in Detroit said it best. Black people went from picking cotton to picking presidents. And it says a lot that we've been holding on to this party, but we've got to figure it out, because we've got it all wrong. But I think it's going in, talking to people, not telling them what they need, but really listening and leaning into our progressive side of this party.
Chuck, can I get in on it? Uh-oh.
Chuck, you're muted.
You're muted, Chuck.
Hey, I'm good now. Appreciate y'all. Corey, I actually was coming to you, so go ahead and take it away.
Well, I gotta agree with Greene there just a second. You know, one of the reasons why Democrats lose, in my opinion, is because we're afraid to be Democrats. And you know, that 68 million people that voted for Trump, we weren't going to get them anyway. But yet the party still tries and tries and tries again to attract those people who don't want to be with us. They've shown themselves as such. So the idea that we should be trying to woo those people over who, in the face of blatant racism, blatant sexism, blatant anti-Muslim sentiment over the last 4 years, they totally throw that aside and say, oh, it's about my 401k. That's a lie. People have been posting it. Our brother Eddie Glaude's clip from a couple of years ago when he basically broke it down and said, hey, this is who we are. And we got to realize that. So the bottom line is that, you know, Democrats in Florida and around the country, we aren't going to win because we try to keep winning over these people in the middle. These people who aren't coming with us anyway. They've shown us that. What's the old saying? When somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. We haven't believed them the third, fourth, and fifth time. And we're still trying to run up that same old tree of winning over people that are supposedly in the middle. But when the opportunity presents itself in about the most moderate Democrat you can find in Joe Biden, you got 68 million people in this country voting against him and voting in favor of Trump. So I say Democrats ought to be Democrats. Go ahead and be progressive and liberal. My kids are making noise. Be quiet. I got kids around here, man. Yeah. And the policies that are supposedly quote unquote liberal or socialist or progressive, as the brother just said, a $15 minimum wage, it passed overwhelmingly. Yet people on the ticket, Democrats lost down ticket. So if we come hard with those democratic ideals, those progressive democratic issues, where we're actually showing that this is the party that actually cares about the people, as opposed to, you know, what your 401k looks like, then those people, and let me backtrack a little bit. It's always said the biggest amount, the largest group of voters that nobody ever gets is the non-voters. I worked at the polls too on Tuesday all day, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I saw the same thing up here. And I'm up in Palm Beach County, brother, up here in Riviera Beach. And I saw this exact same thing. Brothers coming in. Oh, no, I'm not voting. Why? What's the point? And it's like, if they see that you're about getting that minimum wage up, that you're about advancing education for everybody at either low cost or no cost. As Jason just commented, 71% of this country supports universal health care. So if we come hard on those issues, the people will come. So let's stop trying to grab these people who are never coming with us. Barack Obama tried to assuade the Republicans at the beginning of the Obamacare healthcare debate by taking the public option off the table. What did they do? They stabbed him in the back anyway. So they weren't ever going to go with him. And that's how they've shown themselves. So we just got to believe them and be who we are. And when we show who we are, I think the people will come along.
I'm right there with you. Jimmy, you wanted to get a quick reply to that?
Actually, you know, it's funny. What Corey said is kind of my point. You know, look, power, when you get it, it is fleeting. Political power is. And that's what I meant earlier when I said, so I'm not actually disagreeing with him. I said that we can always count on Democrats being Democrats. They won't use that power. I love the fact that that in the first 2 years of Obama's administration, they pushed through legislation. Republicans obviously were obstructionists. They were supposed to be. That's what you get with power. And if you don't see it, and this is what Democrats will do, this is what Biden probably will do. He will probably reach across the aisle, and everybody will forget Amy Barrett. Everybody will forget Kavanaugh. Everybody will forget, man, that was gangster power. And you know me, Chuck, I'm like, hey, that's what power's supposed to do. Don't whine and moan and groan about it. Use it when you got it. So to Corey's point, absolutely. I agree. Now, it'll be an overreach, but you reward your base. You always, that's the return on investment. To hell with anybody who voted against you. But Democrats won't do that. I just know that they'll ultimately wind up being more passive in their approach with power, unless they give it to Nancy and her gavel, because Nancy knows gangster.
Jimmy, I appreciate that. And you and I have definitely had these discussions, both on the NewtNet as well as in private chats through the years. And I agree with you. That's one of the things that I actually admire about the Republican Party. I know people are probably thinking, wait a minute, Chuck, what? Admire? I do. They go for what they know. I said long ago, back 4 years ago, when I was stumping for the Clinton ticket, my position was I am no big fan of the Clintons, Bill or Hillary, but I was a big fan of what it is that they were espousing. I knew back in 2016 that as many as 3, potentially 4 United States Supreme Court justices could be picked. And I thought that that was critical. And yet there were a lot of people who stayed home or they voted for the third party person. And like I said, Jimmy, a few weeks ago, when Amy Coney Barrett was first nominated and then later confirmed in record time, elections have consequences. And at the end of the day, the Republicans did exactly what the Republicans were supposed to do, which was, interestingly enough, for those who don't get to follow me on Facebook, I immediately started countering with, if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were able to be victorious, and if the Democrats were able to take the Senate and keep the House, then we should balance the Supreme Court by nominating as many as 4 and or as many as 6 new Supreme Court justices. But that's the kind of talk that, Jimmy, that you and I have, where a lot of Democrats are like, well, hold, Chuck, maybe don't say that. We shouldn't say that. Just hold that back. Why not say it? If you're in power and you have power, use that power. With that, Steve Reed, I want to come to you right quick on this same topic in regards to the Democratic Party as it stands right now. It looks as if Joe Biden will win the presidency, but it also looks as if the Republican Party will keep the United States Senate, at least for the next 2 years. With that in mind, it's pretty clear that what I just spoke about in regards to being able to balance the courts, that won't happen if there's a divided Congress. Still, with that in mind, what is it that the Democratic Party can do to try to siphon off voters here in the Deep South, also to attract voters across the country who would definitely agree with the Democratic Party on a number of policy-based issues, if you look at the platform, but for whatever reason have been hesitant to support Joe Biden, or they are hesitant to support Hillary Clinton? What are some things that the Democratic Party can do to brand better, so to speak?
I think it's a great question, and it's been fascinating to listen to your other panelists give their various opinions. I agree with a lot of them. I think what the Democrats have to do going forward is we have to talk about pocketbook issues. I think we have to speak to those things that really make a difference in the everyday lives of people. For instance, this morning I was sharing with a good friend about climate change. I said, well, climate change matters to someone who cares, who has the luxury of deciding whether or not it's 2 degrees colder this year or 5 degrees hotter in the summer. I said, that doesn't matter to somebody who doesn't have a working AC or working heater. So you have to think about what hits people where they are. Climate change, certainly if you're in the coast, if you're in Florida, if you're in California and you're an environmentalist, great. That's not a winning issue, in my opinion. You're not going to get Ohio back. You're not going to make gains in Alabama saying we want to get rid of these type of things. Coal, for instance, yes, we gotta translate to renewable energy. That's understood, but the jobs here are still tied to those places. So if you're going to talk about that, you have to talk about where's the replacement coming from. It ain't no solar farm, all right? Because I put the solar panels out there. I don't need anybody working at the solar farm like I do in the coal plants. So you better have a plan to tell these people what their sons and granddaughters are, where they're going to be working in these small towns if you want to try to build this back. The other thing is, I think, again, we have to talk about healthcare. And I don't know that it has to be a quote unquote Medicare for all, but you have to talk about expanding healthcare. It polls well something that people relate to and they think about their families. And you have to talk to them about the benefits versus the overall cost. And you have to really get to a place where people understand that they're going to be taken care of and that they aren't going to see their premiums rise or be kicked off their insurance. So we've got to clarify, I think, our issues in order to try to broaden our message to reach people that we are right now. That being said, we also have to deliver, I think, in the next 18 months, something that gets our voters back out in the midterms. Traditionally, Democrats do awful in midterms. And so to Mr. Greene's point about the Republicans picking up the House, very well could. They'll be redrawing district lines. They're usually engaged and they do a great job of getting back out. So I think the Democrats also have to figure out where's that balance that allows them to keep some of the coalitions together so that when McConnell is defending 23 Senate seats, if the Republicans do pick up the congressional seats, you're running strong statewide candidates that can win some of these Senate seats and get maybe a narrow majority back in 2 years. Because without that, this is going to be a neutered agenda for Joe Biden, who's already a moderate, who's already an institutionalist, if you will. And so when you put all these things together, I don't know that he has a type of room that I would have liked to see him had waking up Tuesday morning with the thought of winning the Senate majority, even by a narrow margin, when it looks at where the numbers are right now. And if I can say one last thing about the Democratic Party, I want to say this, real quick. The Democratic Party has to make sure that 24/7, 365, they're communicating with voters and they're reaching out to the base of the Democratic Party and listening to those issues. Like what Mr. Harris said earlier about this very thing, because if we can't do that, then it's going to be very hard for us to go back to those voters essentially in 2021, late 2021, early 22, to say, come on out and vote for Congress. Come on out and vote for governor. Come out and vote for U.S. Senate. That's going to be a real tough sell if we haven't been listening to what's happened right now and why we are performing better from top of the ballot down to the bottom.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to definitely give kudos to our Spelman sister, Stacey Abrams, for the work that she has done over the course of the last 2 years. We talked about that a little bit on the top, and Corey Smith brought that up, but I definitely want to give a shout out to Stacey Abrams. Again, 6 years ago, if you had told me that Georgia would be on the verge of turning blue in a presidential race, I wouldn't have believed it. But one of the things, being down here in Florida, a neighboring state that has been very effective that Georgia Democrats have done, has been hammering that issue that Steve Reed just was speaking to, which is what is it that potentially Georgia voters, regardless of color, could lose if a second Donald Trump administration happens. One of those things that's curious to me is you hear people a lot saying we don't want socialism, and we'll eventually have another show where we just talk about that, what those terms are, socialism, totalitarianism, and the like. But I always find that interesting, if not curious, when you're on social media and you're hearing people saying socialism is bad, socialism is bad. I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be socialists. But the truth of the matter is Joe Biden has been a moderate to conservative Democrat his entire career. Kamala Harris has been called the police and worse by a number of progressive Democrats when she was running for president. She is no socialist. But even if they were, here's the thing that's interesting is a number of people, when you talk to them beyond you're a racist or you're a homophobe or you're a bigot of any sort, they understand pocketbook issues. And they understand that at the end of the day, if they are at risk of losing their health care, because if that pre-existing illness clause goes away and 1 or 2 years later, you're going to be out of luck. People understand that. If people understand that their Medicare or their Medicaid might be in peril, those are things that resonate with voters. And I thought that in many of the Georgia races that I was able to watch, we get a lot of commercials here in Tallahassee because we're right on the Georgia border. It was very interesting to see candidates in Georgia hammering home those issues about loss of insurance, loss of other entitlements that people are coming to depend on, especially during coronavirus. Jimmy, I think it was either you or Pat that were trying to weigh in. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, I love this kind of conversation. I love listening to Mayor Reed talk about Democrats too. I want to get back to the old days, but don't forget something too. We're talking here in November as if the world's going to stay the same. When Biden gets in, when he's sworn in, he's still got a COVID issue to deal with, and more importantly, the economic issues that go with that. A lot of you guys are in business, or people who are in business, and you understand that when 2021 hits, we really truly will see the financial repercussions of what's happened with these shutdowns. There's still a spillover that's going to ultimately happen. My suspicion is that President Biden will ultimately wind up managing that, much like President Obama had to manage that recession. I think that's a good thing because it stops the overreach. One of the best things that ever happened to both Bill Clinton and with President Obama was in the midterms, they got stymied by a Republican House. Now, Democrats hate that, but what it did was it stopped them, and it made them do something we don't do anymore: compromise, which is exactly what happened with Trump. If you think about Trump, all the bluster and all this stuff that they talk about with Republicans, what did Trump do? I always talk to Democrats like, what did he do that was so god awful? Take away the personality stuff. What did he do legislatively that was so god awful? Nothing. You know what he did? A tax cut. A Republican monkey could have done a tax cut. That's as Republican as the elephant is. I mean, anybody could have done that. So the point being that when Pelosi got that gavel in midterm, it stopped everything. He never had an overreach. And when he insulted his own Republicans, even McConnell pulled back. So they always talk about McConnell being the devil. I'm telling you, McConnell was a master strategist. And what he did was kept Donald Trump from costing him the Senate. So there are breaks in this system. And I think with Democrats in particular, when they get out the gate, much to we were talking about the early Corey's part, go ahead and overreach to a certain extent. That there's nothing wrong with that. But then you're going to wind up getting the breaks with this economy in particular. And I looked at the demographics too. 55% of white women voted for Trump, 18% black men. You can even take that down to 14 if you want, or 12. 36% Latino men, 28 Latino women, 8% black women. There's a thing there for Democrats that they have to understand. Don't alienate that base, because if that base moved or even gave Donald Trump a little bit of this, don't alienate that, but overextending yourself. I think Democrats have a wonderful opportunity not to lose in the midterms. I think they will, because it's going to be difficult for them to balance. And even though Biden is a moderate, there's a huge push with progressives. So do you lose because you're Democrats, or do you lose because you didn't feed that progressive vein? I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Absolutely. Patrick, take it away.
Yeah, I want to go back to one of the things that Nik said earlier about creating room and inviting them into the Democratic House, because we're a big tent party. Only if you mind your manners, Nik. I'm a good Southern boy, and you got to mind the House manners if we let them come in. So we got to make sure they can act right, So also with Mayor Reed, I appreciate him making those points about the midterms, because the midterm election started yesterday. I'm going to go back to the optics and the metrics that I keep alluding to. If we as a party have not collected and disseminated this data, all this wonderful data that we collected from Bloomberg to Biden to now, and put it into use to begin engagement and to begin talking again on neighbor by neighbor, street by street, community by community, and building the base, we're going to be in the same scenario that we've been in 2 days ago. And that's not knowing. We should have a strong enough base with a strong enough data pool that we could create whatever type of messaging we need, authentic, truthful messaging. We should be able to do targeting, because we've run through just teratons, if that was even a word, of data over the past year from all of these campaigns. But these state parties and these county parties they've got to get access to it, and they've got to learn how to use it so that they continue to build these lists for the midterms that are shortly approaching, or actually they just started 2 days ago.
Absolutely. Nik, you wanted to weigh in. Go ahead.
I wanted to jump in quickly and say I love all my fellows on the panel, but don't let the tie fool you. It's Ms. Harris. But I want to say this. We need to be clear, and I thought Corey was so on point, and that's exactly what I was trying to say. When we are Democrats, we win. And it makes me go back, and I was looking at my list up and down for Florida. How do we explain Chevron Jones, our first openly gay Black senator in the state of Florida, Carlos Guillermo Smith, Ana Escamani? When you start talking about all of these progressive folks, that in a night when Democrats got slaughtered, these folks went to a comfortable win. What does that say about our party? And I think it's absolutely spot on. Democrats have to show up and be Democrats. We need to add to our party platform. It's time we need to legalize, forget just medical marijuana, legalize marijuana. We've got to be talking about the climate. We've got to be talking about our environment. We've got to be talking about Medicare for all. We've got to be talking about beyond marriage equality. We have 70% support in the state of Florida and throughout this country for full LGBTQ equality. Why do we think people aren't ready for that? The polls simply don't show that. And I'm looking at progressives that were successful Tuesday. So for us to keep saying that we need to go more conservative, I agree. Why are we chasing that 40%? The 40% of white folks that were going to come and support us, they came. And at this point, we're now losing Latinos, we're losing Black men, and we just can't keep doing it. 2022 is coming, and we're going to be in big trouble if we keep this up.
The point that Patrick made in regards to the 2022 race started yesterday. I actually joined a group on Facebook that's centered upon turning Florida blue in 2022 because the fight is continuous. You know, one of the things that I have tried to express both on this platform as well as within my writings is that I can look back, as we all can, and we can see where certain aspects of conservatism, it has been a long game, long time. For 40 years or more, they have been putting together coalitions to try to get a conservative enough Supreme Court to be able to do the things that conservatives want to see happen. With that in mind, that's why they were spiking the football and high-fiving in the Rose Garden, getting the coronavirus at the same time. But they were doing it because they have waited for a long time to be able to place themselves into the types of position to be able to get it so that they can do what they want to do to fashion the courts how they want to be. And Democrats need to be the same way. Nik, you also raised another issue that's important, sister, that we have to put out here. I like the concept of Democrats being Democrats. That's an argument that definitely will have to be waged. And that's one of the things, Corey Smith, that you and I were talking about offline, as well as the majority of the Spellhouse and FAMU Roundtable crew in our text message chats, which is, what will the party look like 4 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, especially when you're considering the fact that the pushes toward the center as well as to conservatives is just not happening. There are a number of Americans who simply are not interested in certain aspects of or issues that are important to us. They are opposed to gay marriage. They are opposed to any type of what they believe to be special designations for Black people. And when I talked at the beginning of the show about how do we bridge that gap, I'm at a loss myself in terms of how to do that. Like, how can I explain to somebody that it is important to me as a Black man that when I drive out of my neighborhood, that I don't have to worry about becoming a hashtag just because I might have done an improper lane change. If you can't get that on some fundamental basic level, I'm at a loss on what it is that I can do to help you to get it. So with that in mind, I want to go into our last topic for the evening. And this has been quite a riveting discussion, as it always is here on Observation Point. But I want to do some projections here with each of you. Again, it looks as if Joe Biden is in a comfortable lead. 253, according to CNN, 264, according to the Associated Press. Also, we also know we have seen enough in our lifetimes to not be able to depend on that yet. I will never forget 2000, how that went down. It very well could be that Donald Trump could sweep Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada, and Arizona. We don't know what's going to happen, but I want to project out a little bit. 3 issues that I find to be critical this year: the coronavirus, the economy falling down southward because of the coronavirus, And the major issue to me as a Black man, social justice, and the reality that, again, there is still Jim Crow 2.0 here in America with the way our people are treated by the system. With that in mind, I'd like for each of you to project what you see happening if there is a first Biden-Harris administration or whether there is a second Trump administration with regards to those three major issues: the coronavirus, the economy, and social justice. And I want to start with Patrick Grayson first.
Chuck, that's a very, very, very interesting question, because it's really going to make people think really quickly. I think that if there was another Trump administration, that the damage has already been done. And to me personally, that was a social justice question with the appointment of 2 Supreme Court justices. Hell, I don't even remember Barrett getting appointed. I mean, I went to sleep one night and I woke up the next morning and there she was. So my worst nightmare came to fruition with that social justice issue right there. With Biden-Harris, I believe it's going to be addressing and curing this country for COVID/healthcare. I don't think this is our last bout with COVID. I believe that with all of the, I'm not going to be a conspiracy theorist here, but with all of the technology, I'm a physicist by training. And I understand how technology works very well from a theoretical to a practical level. And I think with all of everything that's happening with our food supply system, our food chains, with our immunity systems, I think that we could expect another opportunity from the COVID strain to visit us. And I believe that will be a challenge for Biden-Harris.
Amen. I also want to switch over to Corey Smith. What are your thoughts, brother? Whether it's Biden-Harris or Trump, what will it look like over the next 4 years with regards to the economy, dealing with this coronavirus, and social justice?
As the previous gentleman said, that's a tough one, Chuck. I mean, that is the most loaded question I've heard in a while, brother, because it involves so much. I mean, the easy one is if there's another Trump administration 2.0, hey, we just got to buckle up, man. I mean, that's when I fall back on, my old inspiration, which is always my father, who I am, never shy to tell people that my dad was born in 1928 right here in Palm Beach County and would have been 92 this year. The man who raised me, and he grew up only in some of the most heinous times that we known as a people outside of slavery. That said, I'll never have it as bad as he did. So I take heart in that. I grab hold of my family, my firearms, and my wit and my abilities and my education to help myself and my family get through what are undoubtedly going to be tough times. If there's a Trump, 2.0, I don't think he knows what he's doing with it. We all know that he doesn't know what he's doing with the coronavirus. We just have to hope that the people that are within the government will do whatever it takes to expedite a potential vaccine and get better treatment so that so many of us aren't out here dying. If there is a Biden-Harris administration, you got a lot to clean up. And as the brother said earlier, the number one is you still got to deal with coronavirus. So I think that's going to shape the next 2 years. As we've seen, Dr. Fauci has predicted that, we won't see any sense of quote unquote normalcy until 2022. And that actually makes sense. And Chuck, you remember we've been saying this since it all started. So just buckle up. It's going to be a rough 2 years. It really is. It's been a rough year. I don't think that that's going to change. We're dealing in times that are unprecedented for us. Not that it hasn't happened before, but for us, yes, it's unprecedented. So I think that with a Trump, a Biden-Harris administration, we would have a government that is at least willing to delve into the possibilities of support through infrastructure spending, not infrastructure spending, but stimulus spending to help us. And that's basically what we're going to need, because if we're really going to defeat this virus, we see it through college football, through the pros. This virus is going to spread, and there's nothing we can do about it unless we do the hard work of sucking up our egos, sucking up what we want, and just deal with it. And that means, unfortunately, we're gonna have to sit down and be quiet for a little bit.
Amen.
So,
Mayor Reed,
those are my
again,
predictions.
thank you so much for taking time out. I know that you have another obligation coming up here shortly, my brother. I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak on which candidate would be best situated. I mean, the obvious is I know that you're one of the leading Democrats in America, so you're going to say Biden Harris. But with that in mind, the question is more centered toward if it's Biden and Harris or if it's Donald Trump. Which administration do you think is, or how will either administration, that's the better way to ask this, be able to ameliorate those issues that are of critical concern to Americans and specifically to Black Americans?
Sure, Chuck. I want to thank you. I want to thank again all the folks that are on the panel for the work they're doing down in Florida. That spills over into parts of South Georgia and Alabama and others. So that's appreciative. And certainly, again, want to thank you for the platform that you have and that you use effectively via social media, as well as the traditional media as well. I think it's important that those voices and opinions be heard and be heard from someone who's been speaking truth to power for a long time now, since the days in Shivers Hall. So, that's important. I'll be very brief, and I'm going to have to jump off real quick to get on another Zoom meeting. But let me just say this. I think if Donald Trump has another 4 years, things can get worse. I think that we can see a more strategic rollback of progress that has been made. I think healthcare certainly will be, the Affordable Care Act will be all but dismembered if there's any of it left. I think that he doesn't have a social justice initiative, doesn't want to have one, doesn't plan to have one. And I think that his base, by evidence of turnout and the increased numbers that he has gotten versus 4 years ago, show that there's a base that likes exactly what he's doing and what he stands for, and maybe even appreciates it more now than they did when he was running in 2016. So I don't think there is a social justice plan. I certainly don't think there's a COVID-19 plan. What I would expect him to do would be to try to do everything he could to remove those voices of dissent in the administration and those that are in other appointed positions who've spoken out against his plans regarding COVID-19. And I think his thing would be to open back up the economy in full. And I think as we look at that on the economic side, I think you should expect to see more tax cuts. I think you should expect to see more breaks for corporations. And I think that's what Donald Trump will bring in the next 4 years. And I don't think any of that is good for people of color. And I don't think any of it is good specifically for Black people in this country. I think it is a very bad sign if we're dealing with this 4 years from now. That said, will we survive it? Yes, because we have survived throughout our time here on this continent, period. So survival is one thing, thriving is something else. And so as I pivot to the Biden-Harris administration, what I see is a direct stimulus to cities and communities that have been battling with COVID, whose economies have been decimated by it. I think what they have to do, once they do that, back to the points we were making earlier, is go out and share with the people in various towns, Toledo, Ohio, West Memphis, Arkansas, Tulsa, Oklahoma. You got to get to even parts in Florida that may be considered red, for instance. You got to get to those places as well as your base to show them why their vote matters. So there's one thing that I learned by passing a local referendum just Tuesday night here for the first time ever to increase funding for public education. I wanted to show people the benefits of who you put in office and what the impact could be tangibly. I could talk about policy now until the time I have to run again, and people aren't going to understand it. They understand when I say, you know what, we're putting $33 more million in our schools every year, and this is what we're going to do with that money. So what the Biden-Harris administration, I believe, will do is to get the stimulus out at a major level, whether it's the $2.6 trillion stimulus that Nancy Pelosi originally wanted, or if it's closer to what McConnell and his gang were talking about along the 1.8. I think you have to do that and get that in communities and get people back to work, and then take the full credit in the victory lap for getting people back to work and never stop between now and 2018. I think on the social justice initiative, and this is very key because I know we have a couple lawyers on this call, and one of the gentlemen earlier said, well, what did Donald Trump do in his 4 years, that was very different or that maybe impacted us? I would say the 200 judges that were appointed, 98% of whom were white, another high percentage of whom who were deemed unqualified by the American Bar Association, was criminal. And if I'm the Biden-Harris administration, the first damn thing I do is I expand that judiciary. I expand the federal courts, Chuck. I add at least 100 seats, and I negate the 200 that they had. And I'm going to tell you, if you want to fight, if you want to see Democrats be Democrats, then you put some 30 and 40-something-year-old black men and women and Latinos and others in these court positions on these judgeships, and I'll show you how we protect the voting rights, and I'll show you how we change things from the bench, because that's what's been happening over the last 10 plus years. And I think that would be my social justice initiative that I would advocate to President Biden and Vice President Harris over the next 4 years. And I think regarding COVID, I don't think we need a national mask mandate, but I do think there are some things that we can do to escalate the amount of testing that will be available for various communities that do not have access to it right now. That plus the stimulus, I think, helps us in a big way regarding COVID, the economy, and we expand that judiciary, Chuck. Now we can start talking about some social justice initiatives and how we protect our voting rights and get some of those things back.
Steve Reed, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for all that you are doing in Montgomery, as well as one of the leading Democrats in the United States of America. And I look forward to speaking with you very often here in the future. Take care and Godspeed, brother.
Thanks, Chuck. Take care, y'all.
And the Crimson Tide are still terrible. All right. With that, I'd like to swing to Jimmy Greene. Nik Harris, I'm going to give you the last word, but Jimmy Greene, project out the next 4 years, brother, in regards to whether it's Biden Harris or whether it's Trump Pence part 2.
I wish it was Prince. See my background,
yes, sir.
You know me and Prince. It's interesting to me. And I'm a policy wonk. I do this all day, every day. And I don't mean to be dismissive about this, but, when you talk about Trump or you talk about Biden, either of those administrations, there's a critical missing piece of this. So I can concur or agree with a lot of what some of the folks have said on here, but who controls the Senate? That is the power, because right now you have a Republican House, and if you have a Republican administration, but or a Democratic administration with Biden, but McConnell still controls the Senate, all of these things that you're talking about right now get hung. I mean, they're hung. Nothing happens there. Like, you're not going to get that kind of stimulus. All you have to do is redo Obama's third year in office. So when you start talking about the economy, social justice, COVID, for example, what you're essentially talking about is, let's say, a Biden administration. What can Biden do with executive orders? Because legislatively, he's done. There's nothing he can do there that McConnell doesn't sign on. Now, don't get me wrong. I actually like that. I'd love to get back. And I mentioned this earlier. When you look at the success of Obama's second term, the success of Clinton's second term, it was all divided government. Republicans and Democrats don't do well when they have majorities. Yeah, you throw everything at the gate, but at the same time, there are repercussions for that. So they don't hold on to that. And you look at the fortunes of Black people in particular, which has always been something I've shared with you. I don't believe Black people should be Republicans or Democrats for that matter. I think we should be the strongest independent bloc in the country, because our fortunes tend to do this every 4 years or every 2 years, where when you look at some of the progress that other demographics have, it's a slow incline. Sometimes there's a heavier incline, but I'd love to see us do that. So right now, I'd predict if Biden on the economy, the stimulus is held up, there's no way Republicans will, and I'm just going to operate on the fact that McConnell is the majority leader. So I'll go from there. There's no way that bailout happens with cities being bailed out. That's just not going to happen. Or states like Illinois or Michigan, my state, that's not going to happen. So there you have essentially a stalemated government on COVID. he might use the power of the Department of Health and Human Services to issue some national mandates. That's not a bad idea. When you start looking at our inconsistency around the country, which I believe is really the reason why we're having an increase, is there's no consistency in how we treat this COVID issue. On social justice in particular, here's what's interesting about this too. You can't have it both ways. Like, there's no way you're going to be able to expand the courts. That's war. And I'm not saying, again, if I'm majority, if I'm not going to say that's good or bad, but I will say you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you decide to expand that Supreme Court or any of these other courts, for example, forget peace. Like, just stop saying that. Stop saying we're going to have this great, come together. It's kumbaya, my Lord. That ain't happening, because that is war. So if you're going to do that, then just declare war on Republicans. But to preface that by saying that somehow the divide's going to narrow, not hardly. So from a social justice standpoint, really, I think there's an opportunity for us as Black folks, but we have got to figure out a way to be able to do this in a more bipartisan way or a nonpartisan way without tying these fortunes, because I believe that's really where we are. COVID, in many respects, is a across-the-board issue. Economy is the same way. When you look at social justice in particular, there's no question that we're impacted by it. I love what Ms. Harris is talking about. And, I'm a straight ally, which is interesting, too, because being a Republican, I always help start the log cabin Republicans. By the way, Ms. Harris, that number doubled in about 14 different states. So there's an appeal, because I used to laugh about this. I used to always say that it'd be nice to get Republicans back the way they used to be when they only hated gay people, and not everybody like the Trump Republicans. And I say that laughingly because I am a huge LGBTQ advocate. I sit on as a treasurer on the local LGBTQ board here. So I've seen more Republicans, especially with marriage equality, almost vacate that issue. That's got to be an appeal too, as it relates to LGBTQ citizens in this country, that Republicans are now talking to them about economic issues, social justice, things of that nature, because they're in the room right now. So if Trump gets another 4 years, it's just executive orders. That's all. If Biden gets in, it's executive orders. That's a long way to get there. And I'm just, again, acting on the premise that McConnell is, because that's where the power lies, right there, and the power in the Senate.
Thank you, Jimmy Greene. Nik Harris, take us on out. Final word.
Thank you so much. First, I got to say, Jimmy, thank you for being such a great ally. What does it look like? I think that's sort of an easy question. I don't know that we're any criminal justice reform you were going to get from Trump, you've already gotten it, and it came up light. What scares me most, I think you're dealing with a lot of dead Americans. That's what we're dealing with. We're talking about over 1 million dead Americans in this country, because I think what our president isn't telling us is that ultimately their strategy seems to be herd immunity. And that scares me very, very much. And that's what we're not talking about. And when we start talking about that many Americans dead, I don't know that we're having conversations about criminal justice reform, social justice, or the economy at that point. And that's why 4 more years of this is really dangerous. What does a Biden-Harris administration look like? I think Jimmy stole my thunder. I was going to say it's Obama administration 3.0. You're governing through executive orders, with one caveat that I'm going to give. We aren't even talking about the fact that we're going to have some cabinet picks. And if we can get them in there, what you do if you're Biden-Harris is you send Stacey Abrams, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke across this country, appealing to folks about what it means with these democratic policies and explaining that elections have consequences, and we are going to have to, in 2 years, maintain the House and take back the Senate. And so I think those are the wild cards. Those are the jokers in the pocket playing spades that we got to slam on the table. And I think there's a chance to put together an incredible cabinet. And we need to get our messaging on point and send these folks out in our country to convince folks to come back into the fold. And hopefully that by that second year, third year coming in, we can push some of this stuff through.
Amen. I want to thank Nik Harris, Corey Smith, Jimmy Greene, Patrick Grayson, and as always, the Honorable Mayor Steve Reed for coming on the show. this evening. And I want to thank each of you who's watched with us this evening, who watched the 4 or 5 hours worth of coverage that we had the other night. It is my distinct joy to be able to discuss politics and social issues with you week in and week out here on Observation Point, and also on my side hustle, the Steel Sharpen Steel show that comes on every Friday night, should be coming on tomorrow night as well. With that in mind, again, stay tuned. I always end my Facebook post with stay tuned, because the news travels so quickly. In a moment, we could know who it is going to be the next president of the United States. We need to just stay vigilant. We need to stay calm. One of the things that I have noticed over the course of the last 2 days is that a number of us are anxious. Relax, relax, relax. Like Corey Smith said earlier about his late father, rest in peace. We all have ancestors, parents, grandparents who lived through the worst days of Jim Crow in this country, and even greater ancestors who lived through slavery. Understanding that, we have to understand that, yes, things are not as good as they could be, but our worst days are not as bad as many of their best days. And with that in mind, just keep the faith. Continue to keep the faith that the right things will happen if we continue to set our minds to the things that are important, right, and just in this country. With that, again, stay tuned. If there's something breaking, Chuck Hobbs will be right there to discuss it with you. And I always appreciate it when you come and you provide your commentary as well, because it's all about a dialogue and being able to get through this together. So with that, good night, Godspeed. Talk to you real soon. Have a good evening.